Okay, thanks everyone for coming. This started with a lunch with Tats. And we were nerd speaking and we were bemoaning like, what's happening? A lot of the restorations that are being done now are maybe not going to last a really long time. And it might actually be curtailing the lifespan. And so we were feeling really sad about seeing all these well-intentioned repairs. So I was originally going to talk about what we're doing at San Sebastian. But since there are kids in the house, I'll broaden it to the importance of diagnosis and conservation. So, whoops. Because really, well, there's a method in science. If you guys are ever in charge of a historic building, there's a method in science to figure stuff out, what's going wrong. And if that's bypassed, which sometimes it is, I mean, there's a short budget and all that, but if you bypass that step, you really run the risk of repairing the wrong set of problems, right? How do you know what to repair? And if you repair the wrong set of problems, not only are they going to persist and continue to damage the historic material, you'll also be spending money really needlessly and be confronted with the same stuff 5 years from now. So let me just give you an example. This is a federal building which we're gonna cut out in downtown New York. We were siguro mga 15 years ago, we were asked for a cost estimate to survey it, figure out what was going wrong. So we gave our estimate and the architect said, oh, we'll do it na lang. So do na lang a mortar analysis. So this is the whole building. And actually, it was in great shape. Okay, so yan, so end of that story. 10 years later, we got a call, and they were restoring it na. And they said, come quick, the stones are turning a different color. So we're like, what? Stones don't do that. So we said, okay, send pictures. So this is limestone and mostly granite. So there. These are the new stones that they put in. And he was saying, so there, okay, that kind of color difference, it was from the same quarry, but it's new. So, okay lang. But he was saying, yan. So, he's saying they're starting to get darker. Like here, you see this. So then we said, okay, show us more pictures, yan. And as the weeks went by, it started to get cold. So this was November. They started to get darker and darker. So we got us set up on a swing stage, and we got up there. So I had a moisture meter, and their scope of work was they removed, well, there were actually, let me forward. There were step cracks here. This is a super dark one. I had asked the contractor, okay, what's your scope of work? They removed the crack part. There was step cracks on the joints, and they said they removed that and went behind, and there was this rusty column, which they scraped, primed, and painted. And then they put the stone back. And then it started to turn color. So when we got up there, the joints were wet. Here, you see this. And then you had efflorescence, which is only transported by water. It can't get there if not for water. And so I sat down with the contractors and I said, okay, what did you see? And they were so upset. These were masons. These were master masons. And they were saying, we had to rake out perfectly good joints. And we were weeping because it was so sayang and they were original. And we don't know why we were raking it out, but we were just told to. It was in the specs. So they did it. And they said, and sometimes there was water behind. So I said, didn't you tell anyone? They said, yeah, we did, but we were behind schedule and I don't know. We told someone and bahala na. Diba? That's their problem. So then I went to the architect. I said, so when you did the survey, what happened? So he said, well, there were step cracks, and they were localized. So the scope was to repoint where there were step cracks, but they expanded it, not just that area, but to make sure just wider. And we said, okay, so why are the step cracks happening? And he said, well, because the columns behind it were rusting. And what happens when something rusts? It expands. So the rust molecule is what? Between 5 and 16 times the size of iron. So when something rusts, it's going to push away at whatever is restraining or constraining it. So he said, it's the rust that's cracking it, that's expanding it. So I said, okay, what's making it rust? And he said, water coming through the cracks. I said, but wait, you're saying, diba, it's circuitous. What's causing the cracks? He said, the corroding column. What's causing the corroding column? Water coming through the cracks. So what started what? And so when I said that, his face was just like, oh, wait a minute. So we said, so that was the reason it was all taken out. We didn't get to the bottom of where this water was coming from. So there, the rusty column. So when I went inside, they were saying it was fine during the summer, but when the weather got cold, it started to turn color. So when we went inside, this was a newly painted courthouse, and it was wet. So we were trying to figure it out. The architect did the survey in the summer, and he said there was no wetness whatsoever. And then the contractor was saying there was some wetness, but I was already wearing a sweater. So that happened when it was cold. So anyway, by that time, we got the plans. And, sorry, behind this column were steam pipes. So it was dry in the summer, but wet when the steam was on, when the heat was on. And so they had to take stuff down again. All the stone that they put back, they took down and had to go behind the column and fix the pipes. I don't know how many thousands of dollars later. It's a small misdiagnosis, but it's costly. So on to San Sebastian. So let me just, who's been here to San Sebastian? Everyone, okay. So quick history. If I move here, pwede. This is a shot down our Hidalgo, turn of the century. And today, not a whole lot has changed. The street has, but the building's pretty much the same. It's a different color. This is its interior. Soon after construction and today. What's changed? The floors, the pews. It's dirtier. And they put these lights into the altar, but it's the same altar. We lost our ladder in the pulpit because it was sold in the 70s, but we got it back. Some great donor, bought it, gave it back to us, but couldn't find the ladder. So, but it's back. The chandeliers, that's it. It's still pretty much the same. The skin, the interiors are the same. And the interiors are, to me, as a conservator, one of the most exciting things. Everyone asks, okay, why steel? What happened? Well, earthquakes. While all the other ecclesiastical buildings responded. Well, they were masonry, you know, but they responded by growing shorter and fatter and getting earthquake-proof like that. We took a different route. We changed building material altogether. So before this steel San Sebastian, we lost 4 churches, and they were all masonry. And so it was Genaro Palacios. Sorry, it's not Eiffel, that's a myth, but we'll get there. So he decided, he was the Director of Public Works for the colonial government of Spain. And it was his idea to build with this novel material. Second Industrial Revolution, 1890s, and he said, steel is it. This is gonna be your earthquake-proof material, and we can make it taller, and it's cheaper than masonry. So sold, diba, to the priests, cheaper than masonry. So who built it? These guys, they were general contractors, and they were Belgian. They were the lowest bidder, and they actually had many professional incarnations. You know, some contracting firms kind of dissolve and come back. It's the same board of trustees. I don't know if it was a tax evasion tool or what, but they just kept coming back. And in one of their incarnations, they actually built the train cars for the Orient Express. Cool, no? So this is them in Belgium putting the church together. Can you see? I'll sit down na lang. Putting the church together. And why would they do that? They put sections of the church together first there before they shipped it over. And it was really to prevent a logistical nightmare. I mean, imagine the guy in Manila screwing together part A to part B. Oops, it doesn't fit. It's misaligned. What do? You send it back on a steamship for 2 months. They work on it for 2 months, comes back in 2 months. 6 months later, you may have a part that fits. Right? So they put it together first in the foundries, which is actually now quite common. One of these is Genaro Palacios. I just don't know which one. And that's another shot of it. So that's her bones. And it's all metal. It's actually mild steel. So we started really with historic research, combing through all these documents, and it was quite complete. They weighed, inscribed, and described these pieces. Nuestra Señora del Carmen is actually us. We're the national shrine of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Before New Manila, so we're the original shrine. So there, each piece had its own label, so you know what to screw to what. Diba? It's like an erector set. And that's the dome. And then when it got here, it was painted by the Academia de Dibujo, Pintura y Arte, which was the fine arts school. So imagine a whole summer program. Hey, we're all painting the church. And there are over 100 figural trompe-l'oeil paintings, and they're original. Actually, everything inside, every inch, was hand-painted to look like stone. Even the outside, see, we've been trying to research. There are false joints painted, and then at the base, I don't know if that's supposed to look like granite, but we don't know what color it was. Black and white, right? And on the inside, we have wood doors, wooden doors. You see the fog raining. And everything, the ceiling, the walls, which one is us? Center. But right, you can't tell, you're kind of figuring it out. The other two are masonry churches. Why can't you tell? It's because they were pretty clever about painting these joints. Everything is hand-painted. False joints, their canvas is metal. This is metal sheet. Here's a close-up. So here, that's one metal panel. I guess it goes down here, but these are riveted. So from afar, you don't pick up on the joints, but you just get the impression that you're in a stone church. This is what it looks like on top. This is the true nature of this industrial building. It looks like a boiler room. But downstairs, aside from the paint, the designer really took such great pains to hide its industrial nature. They have all these really cute details. Well, this is upstairs in the belfry. And that's where there's no ornament. It was painted one color. But this is what your columns really look like. These are metal plates with rivets. And then we actually have double walls, and there are cross braces inside. But you can't see them because they're sandwiched. So this is the inside of the column. It's all metal. Downstairs in the public space, they've clad it with fluting. Again, completely ornamental. And then they put ribs. These are cast iron. And there are these really cute details. Everything is screwed, riveted, or bolted. There was no welding used. So it really is a giant erector set.
So theoretically, could you take it apart and put it somewhere else?
No, I mean theoretically, but realistically. They used hot rivets, which is not really used anymore. On the outside, it's the same story. So these are cast iron, well, these are fallen cast iron pieces. This is a cornice that's been screwed on. All of this white, that's all cast iron ornament. And these moldings actually hide the rivets. They go like that. So it was to protect the rivets, but also make it look pretty. There, that's what I was saying. It's actually hot riveted. Right now, we're chasing down this guy who, actually someone I've been dreaming about. I didn't know he existed. He's a Belgian engineer, a structural engineer who specializes, he has a PhD in 19th century Belgian steel buildings with a focus on riveting systems.
Wow.
So, yeah, I know, right?
How old is he? Maybe he's dead.
No, he's not dead. He's a young guy.
A geek.
Yes, welcome.
To be doing that.
So the windows are another really spectacular piece. I wish you guys could get up there and see this thing up close because it's painted glass. Look at that detail. This is, there are 12 of them. And they're in fairly good shape, all things considered. So this is German. From the studios of Henri Oitman, and they came on board that ship from Antwerp. This is it being constructed in Manila. And it was a pretty cool kind of international collaboration because you had Palacios, the designer, who was Spanish, and then the Academia, which was the local school. The guy who did the foundations was French. The foreman was British. A Chinese did the floors, the original wood floors. And then they worked with Filipino artisans and craftsmen. And then they had 2 Belgian guys from the foundry also. Oops. Okay, wait. Method. I'm not sure how to present the method because it was crunching a lot of data. And it was stitching together hundreds of drawings and thousands of photographs and putting it all together to answer our questions. But really the question was, what's causing all this deterioration? That's it. So we spent 2.5 years asking that question, really. And we searched far and wide to find it. Like if we found a leak, it wasn't just, where's the butas? When we got to the butas, we would say, well, what's causing this butas? And it would lead us to a series of other causes and other causes. And it was like this sort of merry-go-round until we arrived at the primary cause. Because until you get there, you're not going to repair the right problem. You're going to be repairing the wrong thing. So it's important to ask that question. And as an aside, what do these wrong repairs actually look like ba? Actually, they look good. They look fantastic, as all newly constructed or newly restored buildings will look. You can't tell it's a fresh coat of paint, it's Massilia. 5 years later is when the material incompatibilities start to manifest. But poor repairs, poor designs, all of that will fail. But by then it's too late. You would have lost some historic material, spent all that money, and in 5 years, the people are going to forget, right? They're not going to link it to a bad restoration. They're just going to say, it's an old building, let's just repaint it again. So we started combing through historic documents, trying to figure out, how is this building constructed? And it got so confusing reading. We found historic specifications. It got a little confusing, so we had to draw it na lang in 3D. So that was the original floor. And they said, yeah, this is what the base of the columns were supposed to look like. And then we drew the building. And then we looked at it really closely. And this is the beginning of our survey already. So we looked at everything, like patches, repairs, missing rivets, and we assigned symbols and put them on CAD on different layers. So we could turn them on and off and see correlations and patterns and stuff. And so that little section we just saw is this small part. So we did it for every surface that we could see. Floors, ceilings, roofs, walls, inside, outside. And then only when you do that will you start to see patterns emerge. You see problem areas, you see where they are. And much as I'd like to talk about all our 100 problem areas, I'll just focus on one so you'll get the picture. The story of the columns. Here, challenges. Our job was to see deteriorating metal. But we can't. We can only see as far as the paint. And it stops there. So unless you scrape stuff off and you dig around and stuff, then you'll see things like this. This was right underneath that. There's really no way to tell. You know, you can stick magnets and figure stuff out. But we did over 200 probes, like just digging through. Here's another one. Like, we took out part of this molding, and it looked just like this, which looks okay. That's really what it looks like without Massilia. There's a lot of Massilia on this building. And paint and Massilia make everything look perfect. And we found not just Massilia, but other pretty creative, well, non-building materials. Jaryo, maong. So, and they were found in places just wedged in there where people won't see. So, if you slice the building in half, this is what it would look like. So it's all hollow. Everything, the walls and the columns. And it became really important for us to see inside those spaces because those are structural, and that's where a lot of the damage would be. That would have parang the true story because it's untouched and those spaces have never been seen before. So Reggie, this guy on the right, our wonderful volunteer, built us this system. We had to drop into the columns. We couldn't use a GoPro or anything that relies on wireless because it's metal. and you would get all kinds of reverberation. So we had to have a cable, which we parang manned like a puppet, and someone to drop it, and we could see what was happening live. So we knew, and then we took photos every half meter. But first to get there, this is the space above the ceiling. This is the attic where we worked. First to get around, we had to build access. So we had to build a catwalk that went around the dome and back, and then that's where we worked. And this is the survey of the walls. This is one of our first shots down the column. And so, yeah, at first we were looking at this and we're like, what's that light there? Wait, that's not, the camera sira. So we kept taking the picture, and that white light kept popping up, and we thought it's really there. It's not the camera. Ayan. It's the reflection of the flash on water. Water. Not just that. Okay, here's another shot. This is your column. These are all holes. Well, you can't see it, but here. These are not small holes. They're this big. They're on all four sides. This column is standing by its tiptoes, by its angle bars.
Wow.
What's that? It's a structural piece. So imagine you being the surveyor, finding this, one of your first columns, you're freaking out, right? What does this mean? Is the building stable? Where's the water coming from? Is it tilting? Should we shut the church down? What's ahead? Who knows what you'll find? Are the others worse off? This is a shot underwater. Look at this. Doesn't it look like a shipwreck?
Yeah.
Which tells us that the water's been there for a really long time. So we plugged the hood and did more.
All the columns?
No, this is half. We have 132 columns. So this is only mga 60-something. We tried to figure out what's going on. And so we looked at these columns really closely. Do you see this? Whack, whack. So they were splaying open, and we were really concerned that this might be what engineers call oil canning, which was the warping of metal plates as an early warning sign of structural failure. So we were in panic mode, right? What's causing all this? So we looked at this column inside and out, counting rivets, patterns, correlations, what's causing what. We actually had to get up there also. We had some suspicions. We had to take some stuff apart to see how it was put together. And we had to do some emergency repairs. Luckily, we found a shipbuilder because we couldn't find anyone else who would cut it. Like, we went to auto shops and they looked at us like we were crazy. You want us to what? And the shipbuilders also looked at this building like, what do you think we are? We're shipbuilders. I said, yeah, but this is kind of like a ship. And contractors, yeah, would come and they're like, oh, this is metal, this isn't, yeah, right, and it's on water. So the volunteers jumped in again, thankfully. So to answer the question, is it tilting? Reggie, the electronics guy, built inclinometers to measure movement. Meinhardt jumped in, our lovely structural engineers, and they built a model to see how this would fare in an earthquake. This is all free labor, by the way, and DigiScript. So Conrad came in and they scanned the church, which came in super handy because it gives us millimeter precise measurements of the building in 3D. Lourdes Garcia, well, there's Ross. You guys know her, no? Ross Lee. So Ross connected us with a structural engineer, Caroline Weiss, in New York, who luckily worked on the Golden Gate Bridge. So she took a look at that condition. She was like, you'll be fine. Because it's apparently like the Golden Gate Bridge. So that relieved us. And she also introduced us to this wonderful woman, Lourdes Garcia Cerezuela, who specializes in the assessment of historic buildings using 3D laser scans. So she came over, we flew her in, and we said, look for oil canning. So she manipulated those scans and did, what do you call it, Conrad? She did a deformation map. This is stuff we couldn't even see. Because this, oops. Do you see this sort of turning of colors? This means that the plates were doing this in like 2 mm increments, which you don't see. So this is where the 3D scans come in really handy as a diagnostic tool. So what did we find a year and a half later, after everybody crunched the data? Also, Dr. Baboyan. Dr. Baboyan is a corrosion scientist, and he's a chief figure in the Statue of Liberty restoration. He was actually our first volunteer, and he's written a lot of books. He's written a lot of standards in the Northeast, and I read some of his books, not all 20-something, and he's a little bit of a demigod. So we cold called him, and we made baka sakali. I knew we couldn't afford him, and spoke about the building and its problems, and we said at the end of the conversation, so can we expect a proposal? And then he said, you know, what you guys are trying to do is pretty amazing, but it also is pretty ambitious. So if you'll have me, I'd love to volunteer. Oh my God, I was on the phone, so I was like, so he was our first volunteer, and his jaw dropped when he saw this building. He's like, I've never seen something like this, not this scale. You know, there are smaller ones in South America, but they're not as ornate. So anyway, what did we find with the columns? We found that 90% of them were leaking. 40% of them had water in the base, and they looked just like this. That's a lot of water. That's mga 2 meters. Yeah. And 5 of them were really badly off.
It's a petri dish.
It's a petri dish. And the inside looks the same. I mean, the water's been there a really long time. Oops. Where's it all coming from? So we had to track that down also. The plates are kind of splaying. The column plates are splaying open from wind-driven rain. So it looks like this. It's all patched up with masilla. When you take it off, you see this giant gap. Here's a close-up of it. And that's all corrosion. So we scraped it off and repainted it. But how we're going to actually repair it, I don't know. Because this is its true nature. I mean, now, after it's been corroded. And there are so many open joints. Water's been getting into the joints. Almost every exterior joint is open. The cast iron doesn't help either. But the biggest source of water is actually these areas. They're all over the building. Right at that corners? No, here you see this? Right at this juncture, someone at some point wedged concrete. The idea was a good one. It was shed like that. Parang it was going to be a roof to shed water, because without that, water just sits here and corrodes it. But he used concrete, which is a really incompatible material. It's not as, it's permeable. Anyway, when we got up there and we took out the concrete, what we uncovered was a hole, a 3-foot hole, in the exact imprint as the concrete, which means the concrete caused it. This is all over the building. There are about 80-something.
Wow, concrete fillers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what does the water do when it's in the column? So it migrates down, but some of it also transfers to the wall and then travels along here and then infects almost everything in its wake. All it takes is a small leak. And the water hangs out there in the interstice. And then it corrodes it, because it can't dry out quickly. where does the water go? This is, look familiar? This is GPR that Conrad facilitated. We were actually looking for a cellar. There was an urban myth that we had a secret cellar underneath our altar. So we were salivating for years. And finally the GPR came, and there's no cellar, but we do have a lot of water underneath the columns. So here. So the water sits there, but it slowly wicks out into the floor, which they've filled with sandy soil. Some of the other columns were in fantastic condition. This is really amazing steel. So when the metallurgists saw it, they were like, trace amounts of vanadium and carbon and copper, and they were floored that this kind of technology existed in 1890. And look, these guys have been sitting in like, what, 70% RH for 132 years, and they're perfect. Look at this. That's the original primer. And we examined the corrosion products. And they were, what were they? Goethite and lepidocrosite, which are very slow-forming types of corrosion. If you would wish corrosion on anyone, you would want to wish them goethite and lepidocrosite, because it takes a long time. And for a while, when they form, they're actually protective. But then after a certain point, they start to wreak havoc. Here's a photo we dug up. This is from the 60s. This is from the 80s. When we looked at it, we were like, man, this thing has been corroding for 60 years in the same places.
I remember those rust marks.
What's that?
I remember those rust marks when I was still there.
And so this is just people meaning well, but not addressing the root of the problem. And so it's just going to keep coming back. So we can assume on and off for the last, 60 years, it's been corroding. And if it wasn't for the amazing quality of its steel, we'd be in trouble. Here's another one. This is a gutter. It's a box gutter at the corner, which looked fine, but right below it, there was a massive, massive leak. And the fathers named it Santa Clara Falls. So when we got out like 6 bags of stuff, like repairs and failed repairs and decades of the stuff. And this was the original gutter. So instead of just replacing it, we asked, why is this, what started it? Why is it in this shape to begin with? So we called in sanitary engineers, and they said, well, it's too small. It's supposed to be 2.5 times the size. So we replaced it with something 2.5 times the size. We used what they use for boats, fiberglass reinforced polymer, so it doesn't rust. And then the rains came. This was our first monsoon, and it was raining in the church. There were buckets everywhere. The walls were wet. We got so confused. You know, in New York, whenever we had like 1 or 2 leaks, we got so excited because it was juicy to track it down. We had over 300. We didn't know where to look. So we built a model to try and figure out where is this coming from. So like, do you see this? This was all wet. And right below it were electricals. Yeah, spaghetti. I mean, like wet water was coming out of the columns, down the walls. We didn't know where to look. It got so bad that we had to address the worst of them. But we couldn't find a contractor to give us a bid we were happy with. And they were also shy to take this project because they didn't want to make patong too high because we were a church. And so we ended up building our own contracting team from inside. So we got the Escuela Taller, that's Anna. So there were 3 of them, and we became our own contractors and fixed our own leaks. Temporarily though, because if you do it long term, you have to take out part A and part B and part C to do D. And where do you stop? So we just patched it for now. So after all of this, after looking at the building and tracing everything down to its primary cause, what were the primary causes? There were only three pala. One is that there were elements on the roof that were originally too small. Either by design or by execution, they were too small. Flashing, that gutter I showed you kanina, that's that little blue dot. And it's supposed to catch water from this area of the roof and this area of the roof, and it's supposed to go down there. So of course it was inundated and choked. And then it doesn't help that years later they put cement over it, which made it smaller, etc., etc. The other is deferred maintenance and funky repairs. Yeah, that's trapo.
Well, when you're desperate.
Yeah. It's
That's
water.
rain in Belgium
Yeah.
kasi. Kayo naman.
Di naman Belgian repairman yan.
Hindi, the original structure. I didn't think about the tropical.
Yeah, I thought about that. Like, did they think about tropical rains?
Realize how
I don't
bad
think it even rains hard in Belgium.
But Palacios was there. That's why. So it seems like parang a specious statement to blame, yeah, the design. But I think, you know, the quality of construction on the roof was a little bit different from below. Below it was kind of pulido. So I can see Palacios saying, well, someone else, yeah, handles the roof. Maybe it was another, yeah, contractor or bahala na.
Yeah, walang one's gonna see it, right?
Yeah.
Building moves a lot and there are no expansion joints.
There are no expansion joints.
Okay.
I don't want to blame the expansion joints or the designer, but the building's going to move from wind, thermal expansion, and even if they're tiny increments, all it takes is a crack this big for the joints to open up. You know, you need just a little bit of water for corrosion to start. I think initially it was watertight. You have hot rivets wanging two plates together on both sides. So it's hot, it's molten metal, and then when it contracts, it pulls it closer together pa. So it's tight. I mean, the Titanic was riveted.
Let's see what happened to that.
Yeah, I know. Don't think about the end.
Diba it shook out or something with the expansion of
Was it a
joints,
rivet?
and the water came in. So you have a Titanic.
Well, sana naman. Yeah, right?
Philippines. Diba?
The typhoon.
So, the joints originally, historically, were sealed with putty, like a linseed oil and chalk. But that loses its elasticity pretty quickly. Or 10 years. And then what do? Diba? High maintenance. Plus, there are earthquakes. What's going to happen in an earthquake, right? The joints move, and then in the Titanic, that's
But there was something intrinsically wrong with the construction.
so the panel came off? Or
Panels came off. Rivets came off. And the design was wrong.
I thought sobra siyang nagkasikas
Yeah.
ng tissue.
Yeah. They were rushing. Hindi naman makikita underwater.
So anyway, so corrosion there nga, it's expansive, right? And that's happening in our joints. So if you get a little bit of water in the joint, ayan na. It starts to corrode and it corrodes inside the joint. So you see this, parang like a very tight button. These are the rivets and it's kind of popping because there's corrosion beneath. So here's the mechanism. Here's your angle bar riveted to these wall plates, and here's your joint. So water comes in, yan, corrosion sits right there, and then It expands and it opens the joints even more. More water comes in. Tuloy-tuloy na. How many joints do we have? It's all joints. So water is coming from everywhere. And when you look inside the walls, there, oh, that's a joint. And that's your water coming in. So we looked at joints really closely. I mean, every little thing, because it's coming from everywhere, and we have to detail this well. And so, was it here? Initially, when we surveyed in the dome, there were buckets above the dome to catch water, and we were laughing at the guys who did this repair. But actually now, after 2.5 years, we're like, hey, that's a pretty good idea. Instead of thinking of this building as a building who relies on its skin to be absolutely watertight, we're going to have to think of it like a boat who has to be watertight in some places, but accepts that water will come in. You just have to get it out quickly or ventilate it so it doesn't corrode the building. Because otherwise, how else do you do this? The stained glass is in fairly good condition naman. It's very dirty, but you can't see it. But in a different light, you can. Yeah, there's so much schmutz, and it's warping. And there are major cracks. We're still figuring this one out. What's that? There's a protective glazing, yeah, and it's glass. And then there's double protection pa. There's a wire mesh on the outside. But all things considered, it's doing pretty well. We're working right now with Henri Oitman. They're still around. And they're run by Stefan Oitman. They're the oldest stained glass firm in Germany. And so we're dreaming of setting up some kind of training program. We have so many windows, not just these, but also on top. So for them to just, yeah. And you want a training program here? To come over, because we have like 80-something windows. They might. They also restored part of the windows. Ay, sayang I don't have a picture, but it's not, you can spot it. Yeah, very easy. The trompe-l'oeil is another problem. Our wall paintings, because it's on metal. Metal is its canvas. So another cheap labor. Christine Leggio from the University of Pennsylvania's Historic Preservation Program adopted this as her thesis. So we just flew her in, put her up in the convent, and she got to work.
Dapat talaga if you're working on that.
Right.
Oh, focus.
So, you know, from afar, it looks okay, right? But it's dark and you can't see well. But any of this wall area up close is going to look pretty bad. So how do you save?
What is this? What is this relative to the picture before?
It's paint on top.
Yeah, this
It's
is,
the column?
it's below. No, it's the trompe-l'oeil. It's down here.
Okay.
So yeah, how do you save a painting whose canvas is corroding?
What's the paint?
Linseed oil. Yeah, iron oxides. So stable naman, but
On the flakes of rust.
yeah, well,
So
I
when
mean,
the rust comes off,
yeah, very simply put, that's what's
so
happening.
how will you fix it?
Well,
If it's your canvas that's sira-sira, so.
So technically, it's an oil painter you use.
what's that?
It's an oil paint. It's linseed
Linseed with oxides in the base is lead white. They primed it with lead white. So here's the corrosion. This is your primer. Sorry, do you know what this is? This is a paint stratigraphy analysis. It's a bit of paint and you slice it, crosswise. So you're reading it in stratigraphy. So this is the lowest layer, corrosion, and then this is the top layer.
So the top, there's the paint.
This is, yeah, the paint that you see. So anyway, the mechanism is the corrosion forming beneath is cracking the paint and flaking it off.
So you can't fix the paint because
They
the
will
rust will
restore it.
come out.
Right, yeah, and the way to save, well, steel or to keep it from rusting is to scrape everything off. Corrosion and paint and just brand new paint. I mean, the idea is that the paint acts as a complete impermeable membrane that will starve the steel of oxygen, right? Yeah, so how to do that? And it's a very poorly researched field, the conservation of oil paint on mild steel in an uncontrolled environment. What's that? Is original? Ah, no. I mean, no one's really breathing and it's not like super flaking off. But, yeah, no naman. I don't think so, but
It shouldn't as a resist on the iron.
yeah.
That's why it's used as a primer.
Yeah, sort of galvanic. So we've been tracking the temperature and RH inside the basilica for 2 years. And essentially where we want to be is at 60% RH, which is this red line over here. That's the best condition for the trompe l'oeil. We want to be below this red line. So as you can see, we're way above it. And it's,
So what do you need to do to be below the line?
we need to cool it to circulate air. Well, actually, to circulate air. And
So that's happening because of hot air accumulating up there.
well, actually, hot air will dry it faster. We just need to ventilate. Keep the RH moving. It's super stagnant air. There's no cross vent. Yeah.
Do you have moisture meters around now?
The moisture meters, the RH, temp and RH, this one.
Okay.
So it can only measure ambient air.
No dehumidifiers or suck out
It's open eh.
dampness. It's too big, no?
We also did paint impedance measurements, which measures the paint's capacity to protect the steel. And because it's so old already and it's so compromised, it's not really doing its job anymore. But it's original. Yeah, so it's a tough one. It's a very unique conservation problem. But here's the good news. Look. Isn't she the best preserved?
So 1 out of 4.
Because here, someone at some point, we don't know who or when, put a really good treatment. They put a varnish. I mean, that's the second best way to preserve it. So it acts as a paint layer. It's clear, and it goes over the original paint. But if it is impermeable, it also starves it of oxygen. We don't know. We're trying to track this person down. We've identified it as some kind of tree resin, damar or copal, we're not sure. So, depending on its age, this is a, I have copal. Can I borrow?
Someone sa gitara.
Oo nga. She's more raw.
Sorry.
Yay. So yeah, so it consolidates the paint also. So it just parang keeps it there. Reversibility might be another problem. It's partially soluble in alcohol. But these are things we have to test and artificially weather and stuff. But whatever it is, it's doing a really good job.
And they put it only on her.
Only on her.
Why?
I think, I don't know, maybe it was a test.
First to leak. First to leak.
What's going on behind that?
Behind her?
Yeah.
Yeah, baka that's
Because
not the only
the
reason.
resist might be on the ground, but
No, when we
there might
took,
be something going on.
she had the highest impedance measurements, which means the paint film or the whatever,
doing
yeah,
its
yeah, it's
job.
doing its job. Um, well, this guy had a leak over him, and he's in really bad shape. If you ran a toothbrush down his face, you would lose it.
Oh.
Some of them are really, really unstable. But given you can, I mean, this varnish does it, but it's got to be tested.
Put that varnish right now on the tiles,
Too late.
Who's losing it
Too
anyway?
late.
unless you spray.
Yeah, we'd like to clean it because it's super soiled. Yeah, how do you do that on flaking paint,
With tweezers.
right? Or maybe spray or something, I don't know. So that's our next step, studying that.
How long have you been working on this? 2013.
No, mga
Before pa.
almost 3 years na.
More.
More. But when I started, we didn't have money yet.
Yeah, but she's already studying it.
Yeah. This
Yeah,
is
before
funded
that.
by the U.S. Department of State through the Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation, administered by the U.S. Embassy. So if any one of you is looking for grants, they fund people.
Oh, baka maubusan yun.
No, I think they like us na.
So you're adequately funded.
No, well, they funded the previous phase. We're fundraising and cost estimating the work ahead.
Which is stabilizing the crevices.
Among other things. Here's the thing, corrosion is active.
Yes.
Yeah.
And some of the findings, like the columns, for example, our major findings there was that because there were only 5 columns that were in really poor shape, we were still okay. The engineers estimate that we don't need all 132 columns. In fact, that's way more than we need to stand. We actually need much less. So there's that contingency, which is just as well because we lose, structure. Yeah, they overbuilt, but now we're using it up. Those 5 columns have lost about 75% of their structural strength. And that's
Are
significant.
they close together or?
They're not. They're spread apart. So
They smoke it.
those localized weaknesses are compensated for by the strength of all the rest of the columns. But yeah, how long is that going to last? Corrosion is active. I mean,
Is there a point of no return? Parang you have
It's
to
gonna
decide,
be-
let's do it now or else we lose it altogether.
Why don't you let Jaime make this one of his benefits? So that Art Council and the
And have you pumped out the water already from the columns?
it's actually better to leave it there.
Why?
It sounds so counterproductive,
Oo
no?
nga, but sige, explain.
If you suck out the water, like if you notice, the butas is only at the zone where the water, parang the tide rises and falls. Below, there's
No,
no,
I asked if they pumped out the water. She said,
Because at Metropolitan Museum, theater, I was telling tax, it's affected by the tax. We were pumping water out.
here naman, it's not groundwater, thankfully.
But
But-
what is the closest estero to this?
Really close by. But this was built on the foundations of 4 previous churches. So I think we're good on that end.
Like liquefaction from the ground.
The
the source of water?
By the way, Mega World wants to
No, the patterns of condensation, don't indicate that. And the type of warping. The engineers also looked at it.
get money from.
Wait, so why would it be bad if you remove the water?
Okay, Judith was asking, did we pump out the water? Did we suck out the water from the columns? No, because it's actually better to leave it in a stable environment underwater. There's less oxygen. If you don't address the source of the leak and you suck it out, and the water comes back and you suck it out, you're subjecting it to wetting and drying cycles, which is actually
Don't want to
worse.
replace the water with a substance that would disallow corrosion. Is there,
Um,
replace it with a different liquid,
No,
perhaps?
no, there shouldn't be any substance there.
We're looking into dropping in zinc anodes.
Some inert, whatever, I don't know.
Oh, as a sidebar, Mega World has been, you know, they have a mall in Binondo, and they're putting up a museum.
Oh, of
And
what?
that's it. They don't know. So they keep asking me and writing to me, and I ignore them. I don't know what to put there. Eh. That once, you know, they have that lucky 8-8.
Yeah, yeah.
The lucky 8-8, and they now want to make it a historical something. So
Oh,
this
good
might,
for them.
Why not? This might no, but you might want to put I'll tell them to put an exhibit.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
I can throw the problem to you and tax. Yeah, because they want me
Delegate.
over Christmas.
Okay.
This would be a good.
Cool.
Yeah, and then we can get Jaime, where we can try to ask Jaime to give earmark this as one.
He did it for the ballet.
He did it for ballet, yeah, so why not this? And this is more closely related, well, you know,
Yeah,
in a way,
art, like-
to art.
Telling him
Yeah.
I mean, to save the
the
Trompe-l'oeil.
trompe-l'oeil and the art panels.
Yeah. Please, that'd be great.
Give me a.
Sige. I'll give you a write-up. Do you see horseshoes?
Yes.
They're original.
Thrown in.
The Belgian builders in the European tradition of good luck
Ah, how nice.
put them in. So we found them in columns strewn about the ceiling. We
Walang
have to
gold
put them
coins?
back into the ceiling.
Walang gold
Huh?
coins.
one given by my mentor.
A horseshoe. Oh, good luck. But parang it's working. When you think of everything San Sebastian's been through,
Was
all
there a
its
massacre there or
abuse,
something?
not that I know of. It's been through a world war, 11 major earthquakes, and none of our priests have imposed their version of a restoration facelift.
correct.
It's original, which is really not something you can say about a lot of our other churches. So this is one of the last that look pretty much like it did in 1891. Who put the trapo? We're not sure. Some campaign in the 80s.
Crispin and Basilio.
They went up to
Yeah,
So what's the plan?
Yes, what's the plan?
So we're working on the building, but it really has to happen.
Rivera wedding there, para national attention would have been focused on it. The
Marian
Dong.
Rivera.
Diba?
Who?
Ding Dong and Marian.
Ah, okay,
Instead of
okay.
that
That's
church
what I
in
thought.
Quezon City should have been there.
She's very photogenic, this church. But I don't know, not many people know about it. When I take friends or whoever, they're like, their jaws drop and they're like, why haven't I been here
There was a
before?
society wedding there maybe 10
Kasalanan
years
ko pa.
ago. Oh, there, Tana.
How long will it take?
Value may doesn't hear.
How long will it take? I mean,
It depends on how much research.
we have a lot. Yeah.
There it is, oh.
So we figured out what's going wrong and we're designing repairs to fix it. We don't know what yet. I mean, there are many ways to skin this cat. So we're also developing cost estimates. So this isn't this is a super ballpark figure, but we're looking at about a little bit north of 400 million.
That's just
No, pesos.
Pesos.
structural,
Yeah.
interiors.
Pati yung paint job.
The trompe-l'oeil depends on how we end up treating it.
Remember that everything is painted. It's painted the fromage, froid, and it's all
And it's, yeah.
But you know, you would have it like in phase 1, phase 2.
Yeah.
So phase 1, how much would you
Structural.
need? Then phase 2. Phase 1 to save how many columns? I think that would be the most important. No? Phase
To
1.
stabilize it.
Stabilize columns.
But if we can kind of demonstrate and like make this a popular church and track income, increased weddings, etc., maybe, in 10 years, some parish priest,
awareness of
yeah, will say, hey, there's a market for authenticity somewhere. Maybe I shouldn't touch my church.
True.
But it's some sort of advocacy also. But instead of saying, hey, don't do that, we'll just say, hey, we did it here, take a look. Tapos, di ba?
You could help them apply.
You guys, I noticed, when we looked at the old photos of the church, I mean, the old plaza with the parking lot. What would there? Yeah, there you go. There, wow.
Even it says it was on the list.
Yeah.
And they
No, there's it's small. It's down there.
What's your what? What's your question?
It's a smaller one. But the thing is, there was no parking. Would the priests be amenable to actually making it a plaza? No?
Partially, we'll have to solve the parking problem. This is their time now to dream. And I guess this isn't their cup of tea, right? They're almost in a different mind frame. So, this part?
And that wall is
Augustinian Recollects.
But the perimeter wall's higher now than it was before.
Yeah, it was originally wrought iron walls, low wrought iron fence.
Yeah.
this particular order.
And then, how about that structure beside the wall? Like, no, the one in the current pictures.
I'm sorry.
That green thing.
This one?
No. That one.
That's an adoration chapel. No, it's been there. Before we got there. And we had a surprise. Back here, there was a new statue with a shed, with a galvanized roof.
The no abortion.
Blocking our ventilation, but just one day she popped up. It was a donor and he wanted it there. I'm like, but this is the national shrine of Mount Carmel. She's inside, the original's inside. Why?
Kasi I was there Thursday. Oh, Wednesday, yesterday. This is the way, right now you couldn't see the church because of all the posts, lamp posts here.
These ones?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very messy.
I was trying to get a good shot of the church. It's
hard, no? Of the facade.
Impossible.
Turns in, so it's kind of behind the road.
Yeah. And then, I was thinking, kasi if you go to Saigon now, to Ho Chi Minh, they're actually doing a lot of revitalization. So, City Hall, what they did was, the flooring of the plaza in front of it went all the way to the street. So it's like one big open space, which they're planning to do. So, it's a single level. It's actually, they're doing it right now. As in, it's all fenced out, but the street is already, and they don't use concrete pavers, they really use stone pavers. It's really nice.
Yeah, so we need to get the buy-ins of the priests and start planning this out.
I think in Europe the parking issue would be solved by going underground.
Underground.
In Europe, that's what they do for, when you have a major church and a plaza in front of it.
Yeah, we'll have to sit down with the whole team and just plan it out. That's a big
Students,
team.
no questions.
So why are we not following the
This is Paulo's doodle.
Yeah, that's
He was like, hey, maybe we can do this.
this I took the other day.
Nice.
Where's Paulo? Yeah.
I'm here.
Look at this. Someone sent me a link and they're like, were you aware of this?
Wow, look that down.
Ano ba? That was the previous parish priest. So even, within ourselves, it's...
Tear down the original.
Yeah, right? I don't know where he got these figures or
Looks
what.
like Wikipedia. This is Wikipedia.
Well,
I know.
why don't you correct it?
the
Diba you
old
can
parish.
correct with
So, but the
Celia?
new parish priest, you have no problem with them. They're happy. They love
I
it.
would wish that they were like, rah, 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 let's do it. It's more like, okay, you can do it. But we really need
So
their
who are these
backing.
European restorers?
What's that?
Who are these European restorers?
I have no idea. Yeah, I don't know. So, yeah, but hopefully, I mean, when they get behind it, compared to 4 years ago, they're much more supportive. And in 4 more years, maybe they'll really be pushing this. And it can be something really that's on the map that people are proud about, that we can say, hey, this made money, it made financial sense. And it actually makes sense to preserve it in the long term. But I think we need an example to say,
Those are the guys
done.
who finish it for you.
Yeah.
Ina, I have a question. The street in front of it is a city.
And you.
Yes.
Have you ever talked with our good mayor?
Our good mayor is, yeah, he keeps saying yes, 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 but he said his priority is Escolta.
Showed up on the comments.
Very nice.
I'll get your number.
No more questions, students.
Questions? Children.
Children, you remember, you're the one gonna take over from her.
You're
and
next.
from me. You're next. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, we've been running. We have 80 volunteers pass through our doors. And they're small and large. Or we had, I got a call, Madam, my name is Zosimo Kabiluting. I was a sacristan in 1963. And I heard what you're doing, and so how may I be of service? So he did our SEC stuff. Yeah. I mean, 80 is a lot of people. This was volunteer sweat and
Ongoing.
Department of State. Yeah, people just kind of come in and
It's a
out.
large
and
church.
That's a lot of steps, yeah. And we're hauling everything, the electricals, the lighting, everything. But since there's so much original material, it has really so much void for it.
It was World Monument Fund watch list, I remember.
It was in 2000.
Same time as Santa Maria Church.
Oh, there's a
Yeah,
story to
and then
that.
2010, but they didn't fund.
There's a story to that. The first one daw, the priest returned the money. He didn't want it. 25,000.
It wasn't blessed. Was it?
Yeah. So,
That's the irony. They were given money and then the priest sent it.
phase 1 and
Phase one.
Can we ask a question about
Yes.
which particular line of the Department of State in Washington, D.C. is in charge of all these studies?
you know, I don't know. They're just called the Ambassadors Fund for
Department
Cultural
of State.
Preservation. Department of State.
State.
Oh, they
State
set
Department.
a cultural arm.
State Department, not trade.
Yes, but he actually doesn't. They administer, so they get the money from Washington, but actually the decision makers are a blind panel. No one knows who they are in Washington. Wala si Miko.
Hindi,
Si Miko lang pala, no?
Blind nga daw, kaya I can still see.
Siya yung mga unknown Americans in the mga palasan.
Feeling eyesight, but I'm not blind.
Do you have a card? Or debit from tax?
Yeah, I didn't bring my cards. So, on to Victoria's. Sorry, I took so long. Take a bow.
Maybe